Imagine a remote corner of Brazil, vast, untamed, swept by endless winds across open plains where horsemen ride beneath a burning southern sky. Now, imagine that in 1835, this province dared to challenge the Brazilian Empire itself. Not for days, not for months, but for nearly an entire decade of war, bloodshed, and unrelenting ambition. This was the reality of the Ragamuffin War, also known as the Farroupilha Revolution, one of the longest and most dramatic uprisings in Brazilian history, a conflict that began as an economic protest and evolved into a bold republican dream that would permanently shape the identity of southern Brazil. To understand this war, we must step back into a fragile moment in Brazilian history. The country was living through the Regency period. After Dom Pedro I abdicated the throne in 1831, his son, the future Dom Pedro II, was still a child. Brazil was ruled by regents, and the empire stood on uncertain ground. Political instability spread across the nation, and regional revolts began to erupt. In the southern province of Rio Grande do Sul, dissatisfaction was reaching a breaking point. The economy of Rio Grande do Sul was built on cattle ranching. Its most important product was shark, salted and dried beef that fed enslaved workers and laborers in other regions of Brazil. But the imperial government imposed heavy taxes on locally produced shark, while imported beef from Uruguay and Argentina faced far lower tariffs. The result was devastating. Foreign products became cheaper than domestic ones, and local producers felt betrayed by the very empire they supplied. What began as economic frustration slowly transformed into political defiance. Yet, the revolt was not only about taxes, it was also about power. Local elites demanded greater autonomy for their province. They believed the imperial government in Rio de Janeiro concentrated too much authority and ignored regional realities. In a nation still struggling to define its unity, the tension between centralization and provincial freedom created a volatile atmosphere, and in the south, it would ignite into open rebellion. On September 20th, 1835, the rebellion began. Armed rebels seized Porto Alegre, the provincial capital, marking the official start of the conflict. Led by figures such as Bento Gonçalves, the movement quickly evolved beyond protest. In 1836, the rebels proclaimed the Riograndense Republic, also known as the Piratini Republic, declaring independence from the Brazilian Empire. It was a bold and dangerous step, transforming economic revolt into separatist revolution. As the war expanded, it drew in unexpected characters. One of them was Giuseppe Garibaldi, an Italian revolutionary who would later become a hero in the unification of Italy. In southern Brazil, Garibaldi fought alongside the rebels, leading naval operations and helping to proclaim the short-lived Juliana Republic in the neighboring province of Santa Catarina. For a brief moment, the revolutionary flame seemed unstoppable. But the war was long and brutal. It was not defined by grand decisive battles, but by guerrilla tactics, cavalry raids, and years of exhaustion. Both sides suffered. The imperial government, determined to preserve national unity, appointed a skilled military commander, Luís Alves de Lima e Silva, later known as the Duke of Caxias. Through a mix of military strategy and negotiation, imperial forces gradually weakened the rebellion. The conflict also carried painful contradictions. Many enslaved black soldiers joined the Farroupilha forces after promises of freedom. They formed the famed Black Lancers, fighting bravely throughout the war. Yet in 1844, tragedy struck at the Battle of Porongos, where many of these fighters were killed under controversial circumstances. For some historians, this episode represents betrayal, a dark shadow over a movement that spoke of liberty while navigating the realities of a slave-holding society. After nearly 10 exhausting years, both sides were drained. On March 1st, 1845, peace was finally achieved through the Treaty of Ponte Verde. The treaty granted amnesty to the rebels, incorporated many of their officers into the imperial army with preserved ranks, and addressed some economic demands, including protections for local shark production. The dream of independence ended, but the rebels did not leave empty-handed. Although the Riograndense Republic was dissolved, the legacy of the Farroupilha Revolution endured. It strengthened regional identity in southern Brazil and became a powerful cultural symbol. Even today, the events are commemorated annually during Farroupilha Week, when traditions, music, dress, and historical reenactments celebrate a decade that reshaped the spirit of Rio Grande do Sul. The Ragamuffin War was more than a regional uprising. It was a test of Brazil's fragile unity, a confrontation between central authority and provincial autonomy, and a story filled with courage, ambition, contradiction, and sacrifice. It reminds us that nations are not built in silence. They are forged in tension, struggle, and the relentless pursuit of identity.